The woman who smiled while my house turned to ashes never imagined she'd be standing when I entered the courtroom wearing a judge's robe. The first sound I heard wasn't the bailiff calling the room to order. It was the sharp click of an expensive silver pen slipping from nervous fingers and striking polished oak. Every head turned toward the woman sitting at the plaintiff's table, but I never took my eyes off her. Vanessa Whitmore had spent weeks believing she'd already won. She had spent even longer convincing herself that people like me always folded when enough pressure was applied. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper, fresh coffee, and polished wood, the familiar scent that had greeted me thousands of mornings over the years. Yet today, it carried something else: anticipation. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, cutting bright lines across the floor as conversations faded into whispers. Vanessa leaned toward her attorney with the same confident smile she had worn during every HOA meeting, every violation notice, every letter demanding that I surrender the property my father built with his own hands nearly 40 years earlier. She looked relaxed, almost amused, as though this hearing would simply be one more formality before she erased the last obstacle standing between her and the luxury development she wanted so badly. Then the courtroom deputy opened the side door. All rise. Chairs slid backward. Shoes scraped against hardwood. The room stood together, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Vanessa's expression stopped moving. Her smile disappeared before I even stepped through the doorway. She recognized my face immediately. She just couldn't understand why I was wearing a black judicial robe instead of the faded denim jacket she had seen me wearing only weeks before. The silence that followed felt heavier than any words ever could. Her silver pen rolled slowly across the table and came to rest beside a thick stack of documents she had personally signed. Every signature represented another decision she believed would force me to abandon my home. Every page would soon mean something very different. As I approached the bench, my attention drifted for only a second to the faint reddish stain still trapped in the stitching along the edge of her designer shoes. Most people would have overlooked it. I hadn't. Some details become impossible to forget once you've watched your entire life disappear overnight. 6 weeks earlier, before lawyers, hearings, and cameras crowded the courthouse steps, before reporters whispered my name outside these doors, my home was still standing beneath the shade of an old white oak. It wasn't the biggest house in Broward County. It certainly wasn't the newest. But every porch board, every cedar beam, every window frame carried my father's fingerprints. People driving past saw an aging cabin on valuable land. I saw Saturday mornings with my dad teaching me how to swing a hammer, Thanksgiving dinners that stretched late into the evening, and quiet nights after my wife passed away when that old house was the only place that still felt like home. Vanessa Whitmore never saw any of that. She only saw one property refusing to disappear. She believed fire could erase memories, paperwork, and resistance all at once. What she never understood was that the truth has an unusual habit of surviving exactly where arrogance expects it to burn away. I have never believed that a house is just lumber, shingles, and nails. My father, Daniel Cole, used to say that every home remembers the hands that built it long after those hands are gone. When he bought that little piece of land on the edge of Broward County, people laughed because it was nothing but uneven dirt, stubborn tree roots, and an old white oak that refused to fall. He spent 3 summers building our home one board at a time after finishing his regular job, and by the time I was 16, I could recognize the sound of every floorboard without looking up. Even decades later, I still knew exactly which kitchen cabinet squeaked, which porch step creaked during the winter, and which window always caught the first golden light on a clear October morning. After my wife, Emily, passed away, friends suggested I move somewhere smaller, somewhere newer, somewhere that did not carry so many memories. I thanked them, but I stayed. Exactly where I was, because leaving that house would have felt like leaving the last chapter of my family behind. My life probably looked ordinary to anyone driving past. I mowed my own lawn every Saturday. I stacked firewood before the first cold front arrived each fall. I drove an old blue Ford F-150 with more miles than most people would tolerate. I waved to neighbors, picked up groceries from the same family market every Wednesday afternoon, and spent quiet evenings reading through thick folders at my dining room table. People occasionally noticed the blue document case I carried to and from my truck, but nobody ever asked about it. and I never volunteered an explanation. Privacy has a way of becoming comfortable when your work depends on listening more than speaking. Even at community gatherings, I preferred standing near the back, holding a paper cup of coffee, letting everyone else do the talking. That was probably why Vanessa Whitmore underestimated me from the very beginning. She saw weathered porch rails instead of family history. She saw an aging pickup instead of financial stability. She saw a quiet widower instead of someone who paid close attention to every conversation and every document placed in front of him. The only thing on my property that never changed was the old hammer hanging above the fireplace. The wooden handle had been polished smooth by my father's hands long before mine ever wrapped around it. Every time I walked past it, I remembered his favorite advice. He would smile, hand me another nail, and say, "Measure twice, son. You only get one chance to make the first cut the right way." I did not realize how important those words would become until the people running our homeowners association decided that my home was no longer an inconvenience they wanted to tolerate, but an obstacle they intended to remove. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs were already there long before the first official letter ever appeared in my mailbox. The first letter from the Homeowners Association arrived on a bright Monday morning tucked neatly between a grocery flyer and my electric bill. It was printed on heavy cream-colored paper with an embossed logo that seemed far more interested in looking important than saying anything meaningful. According to the notice, my mailbox post did not meet updated community design standards. I smiled, measured it with a tape measure, and discovered it matched every published guideline I had received when I purchased the property years earlier. I filed the letter in a blue document case, made a copy, and went on with my day. 3 days later, another notice arrived claiming my pickup truck had been parked in the driveway longer than community regulations supposedly allowed. A week after that, they cited stacked firewood that had been sitting in exactly the same place for years without complaint. Then came a warning about the color of my porch railing, followed by another concerning landscaping around the old white oak. None of the accusations made much sense by themselves, but together they painted a very clear picture. Someone wanted a reason to pressure me, and they were willing to invent one if necessary. I finally met Vanessa Whitmore in person during one of her routine inspections. She stepped out of a spotless white sport utility vehicle carrying a leather folder and wearing the practiced smile of someone accustomed to getting immediate agreement. She complimented the view from my front porch before explaining that Silver Ridge Estates was entering what she called a new era of growth. She spoke enthusiastically about rising property values, luxury amenities, and a planned clubhouse that would transform the neighborhood into one of the most desirable communities in the county. Then she unfolded a glossy site map across the hood of my truck. My property sat directly in the middle of the proposed entrance boulevard. Every landscaped median, decorative fountain, and private access road curved neatly around one small rectangle marked with my lot number. Vanessa tapped the map with a polished fingernail and said the entire project depended on assembling every parcel without exception. She assured me that generous buyers were waiting, paperwork could be completed quickly, and moving would give me a fresh start. I thanked her politely and told her that my answer was no. Her smile never disappeared, but something behind her eyes changed. Before leaving, she said progress always required cooperation and that holding on to the past could become surprisingly expensive. I watched her drive away, then folded the map and placed it beside every violation notice she had already sent. Over the next several weeks, the letters became more frequent, the language became more aggressive, and the deadlines became shorter. Every envelope carried another demand for payment or another warning about possible penalties. Instead of arguing, I responded the same way every single time. I requested written clarification, asked for copies of the governing documents supporting each claim, and encouraged every conversation to continue through email whenever possible. Vanessa seemed delighted that I never raised my voice because she mistook patience for weakness. She did not realize that every message she sent, every signature she placed on official correspondence, and every new allegation she approved quietly expanded a record that would eventually tell a far more complete story than either of us could explain with words alone. By the beginning of the next month, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. Every time I corrected one alleged violation, another appeared within days, as though someone had prepared an endless checklist designed to wear me down rather than improve the neighborhood. One afternoon, a contractor hired by the Homeowners Association appeared at my front gate and informed me that several shrubs near the property line needed to be removed because they supposedly interfered with future community maintenance. I politely asked him for the written authorization. He admitted he did not have one and quietly drove away. 2 days later, I received another notice claiming I had refused to cooperate with scheduled maintenance that had never actually been scheduled. Instead of responding emotionally, I added another document to my blue case, highlighted the dates, and placed the latest envelope beside the growing stack. At the monthly Homeowners Association meeting, Vanessa stood confidently in front of a projector displaying colorful renderings of walking trails, decorative fountains, and a grand entrance lined with stone columns. Residents applauded the vision while she spoke about modernization, investment, and community pride. Then she casually mentioned that a small number of homeowners continued to resist progress and suggested that everyone else was unfairly paying the price. She never mentioned my name, but she did not have to. Several people turned toward me before quickly looking away. After the meeting, one neighbor quietly apologized for believing the rumors that I was refusing reasonable offers simply to create trouble. I smiled and told him rumors usually travel much faster than facts. Meanwhile, every conversation with Vanessa followed the same predictable pattern. She would offer another opportunity to sell, explain that the market would never be stronger, and remind me that legal disputes could become expensive. I would thank her for the information, decline politely, and ask that any future proposals be provided in writing. Her confidence seemed to grow each time I refused to argue. She interpreted calmness as surrender waiting to happen. What she never understood was that silence often encourages people to reveal far more than they intended. One afternoon, she arrived carrying a revised purchase agreement and placed it on my porch railing. She explained that her husband, Richard, had already spoken with developers who were eager to begin construction as soon as every parcel had been secured. I noticed that the conceptual drawing now showed a landscaped boulevard passing directly across the ground where my living room stood. Without realizing it, she had confirmed something I had only suspected before. My property was not simply desirable. It was essential. I folded the proposal, thanked her for making another written offer, and placed it inside the same blue document case that had become thicker with each passing week. As she walked back toward her vehicle, she paused beside the old white oak and said that every outdated structure eventually reaches the end of its useful life. I looked at the tree my father had protected while building the house and answered that some things become more valuable precisely because they have endured. She smiled politely, climbed into her vehicle, and drove away believing she had delivered the final warning. Watching the dust settle along the quiet road, I had the unmistakable feeling that the real confrontation had not yet begun and that someone was becoming impatient enough to stop relying on paperwork alone. A few days later, I did something that seemed to surprise Vanessa more than another refusal ever could. I called her office and told her I was willing to review one final purchase proposal if she believed it represented her best offer. There was a brief silence before her voice became almost cheerful. She scheduled a meeting for the following afternoon at the Homeowners Association office and assured me that we were finally making progress. When I arrived, a polished conference table had already been prepared with neatly stacked documents, bottled water, and color renderings of the future entrance boulevard stretching directly across my property. Richard Whitmore was there as well, confidently discussing construction schedules and estimated completion dates, as though my signature was merely a formality. Vanessa slid the purchase agreement across the table and explained that delaying any longer would only complicate everyone's future. I read every page carefully without rushing. Most people skim paperwork when they believe the outcome has already been decided. I have learned that the smallest sentence often carries the greatest consequence. Before signing anything, I quietly asked for one revision. I requested language stating that every homeowners association record, inspection report, meeting minute, email, engineering drawing, and communication concerning my property would be preserved in its original form until the transaction, if completed, had been fully finalized. Vanessa barely glanced at the paragraph before smiling and saying that transparency had never been a problem for the association. She initialed the change without hesitation. Richard followed with his own signature, and their attorney added his approval a few minutes later. I thanked them for accommodating the request, folded my and signed copy, and slipped it into the blue document case that rarely left my side. As I stood to leave, Vanessa reminded me that she expected my final decision within 48 hours. I simply nodded and wished everyone a pleasant afternoon. Driving home beneath a sky turning orange with the setting sun, I realized something important had changed. They believed I had finally begun to compromise. In reality, they had just committed themselves to preserving exactly the records I suspected would become essential later. That evening, I organized every letter, photograph, survey, receipt, and email into chronological order across my dining room table. The old hammer still hung above the fireplace, catching the warm glow from the reading lamp, while the familiar ticking of my father's antique wall clock echoed through the quiet house. Before going to bed, I placed the blue document case inside a fire-resistant safe in the study along with family photographs, property deeds, and the original building plans my father had drawn by hand decades earlier. It was not because I expected anything unusual to happen that night. It was because experience had taught me that important records deserve protection long before anyone realizes how valuable they may become. Outside, the old white oak swayed gently in the evening breeze, and the neighborhood settled into its ordinary rhythm of porch lights, distant lawn sprinklers, and barking dogs. Everything appeared perfectly peaceful. Yet somewhere beyond the darkness, someone had apparently decided that paperwork alone was no longer enough to remove the final obstacle standing in the way of a multi-million-dollar development. And before sunrise, the quiet life I had protected for so many years would change forever. At exactly 2:17 in the morning, my phone vibrated on the nightstand before it had the chance to ring a second time. A neighbor's voice came through the speaker, strained with urgency but controlled enough that I understood every word. He told me I needed to come home immediately because something had happened at my house. The drive back felt longer than it ever had before, even though the roads were nearly empty. A faint orange glow appeared above the tree line several miles away, and with every passing minute, I found myself hoping it belonged to someone else. Hope disappeared the moment I turned onto my road. Emergency vehicles lined the shoulder with flashing lights reflecting across the familiar branches of the old white oak. The air carried the unmistakable smell of wet cedar, smoke, and damp earth after thousands of gallons of water had soaked the ground. Firefighters were moving methodically around the property, speaking calmly into radios while checking every corner of the structure. My home, the place my father had built board by board, was no longer the place I had left only hours earlier. I stood behind the safety line without saying a word, watching the early morning breeze carry tiny flakes of gray ash across the yard where my wife had once planted spring flowers. One firefighter placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder and quietly explained that everyone had arrived quickly, the surrounding homes were safe, and investigators would begin their work as soon as daylight allowed. I thanked him because there was nothing else to say. Then I noticed something that did not fit. Vanessa Whitmore was already standing across the street wearing an expensive cream-colored coat despite the cool morning air. She was speaking softly with several residents, occasionally glancing toward me with an expression that seemed carefully practiced. As she crossed the street, she offered sympathy, told me how unfortunate the situation was, and almost immediately added that the Homeowners Association would help coordinate removal of what she called the unsafe structure. I looked past her for a moment and noticed a faint reddish clay stain pressed into the edge of one designer's shoe. It caught my attention because the only place that particular clay existed nearby was the narrow service road running behind my property, a road most residents never used and certainly had no reason to visit before sunrise. Before I could consider the detail further, she mentioned that rebuilding might be more difficult than people expected under updated community standards. She even suggested that accepting the association's purchase offer would now save everyone unnecessary complications. The timing of her proposal felt strangely polished, almost as though the conversation had been rehearsed long before that morning. I did not argue. I did not accuse anyone of anything. Instead, I simply thanked her for the information and asked that every future communication be provided in writing, exactly as we had done before. Her confident smile returned immediately, because she mistook my composure for defeat. After she walked away, investigator Laura Bennett arrived carrying a clipboard and introduced herself as the fire investigator assigned to the scene. She explained that the examination would take time, and asked whether anything unusual had happened during the previous few weeks. I handed her a business card, gave her the blue document case that I had retrieved from the fire-resistant safe before leaving for work the previous day, and quietly told her that the story had not started with what remained of the house. It had started with paperwork, signatures, and one piece of land that someone wanted badly enough to stop waiting. The days that followed settled into an uneasy routine that felt almost too orderly for everything that had happened. Investigator Laura Bennett visited the property every morning, carefully documenting measurements, photographs, and observations while reminding everyone that conclusions would only come after evidence had been reviewed. I respected that approach because assumptions have never belonged in serious decisions. Meanwhile, Vanessa appeared determined to move faster than the investigation itself. Before the week ended, I received another certified letter from the Homeowners Association informing me that the remains of the structure posed a safety concern and should be cleared immediately. The letter also included a new purchase proposal, this time suggesting that selling the property would spare me the expense of rebuilding under updated community requirements. I read every page, placed it beside the previous offers, and noticed that the language had become noticeably more urgent. 2 mornings later, a large construction truck stopped outside my property, followed by another vehicle carrying temporary fencing. The crew leader politely explained that he had been instructed to prepare the site for cleanup. I asked whether he possessed written authorization from the county or from the ongoing investigation. He admitted he only had paperwork from the Homeowners Association. I thanked him for his honesty, made a copy of the work order with his permission, and suggested that he contact his employer before doing anything further. Within 30 minutes, the trucks quietly left. That small conversation told me more than any rumor ever could. Someone was trying very hard to move the timeline forward before every question had been answered. Later that afternoon, Samuel Brooks walked across the street carrying a small memory card in the palm of his hand. He explained that he maintained a trail camera behind his shed because deer frequently wandered through the wooded area bordering our properties. He had not looked at the recordings until hearing about the investigation, but after reviewing them, he believed they might be useful. I thanked him and immediately contacted Investigator Bennett rather than examining the files myself. Evidence belongs in the proper hands, and preserving its integrity matters just as much as discovering it. Bennett arrived within the hour, documented the chain of custody, and secured the memory card according to procedure. She never revealed what the recordings showed, but I noticed her expression become much more focused before she left. The following morning, another envelope arrived from Vanessa's attorney, this time announcing that the Homeowners Association intended to seek legal action to recover cleanup expenses and enforce what they claimed were long overdue community obligations. The confidence reflected in every sentence suggested they believed the pressure would finally convince me to surrender. Instead, I responded exactly as I had from the beginning. I requested that all communications continue in writing, preserved every document, and declined to discuss the matter outside official channels. Several neighbors quietly stopped by during those days with meals, kind words, and offers of temporary storage for the few belongings that had survived. Their generosity reminded me that a neighborhood is defined by people, not by an association's letterhead. While others focused on the ashes covering my yard, I found myself paying closer attention to paper trails, signatures, dates, and timing. Buildings can disappear overnight, but records have a remarkable way of revealing whether every step leading to a disaster truly happened by chance or whether someone had been carefully arranging the pieces long before anyone else recognized the pattern. The official hearing was scheduled less than 3 weeks later, and judging by the filings submitted by the Homeowners Association, Vanessa believed momentum was entirely on her side. Her attorney argued that the damaged structure created an unnecessary burden for the community, delayed planned improvements, and justified immediate action concerning the property. Every document they filed carried the same unmistakable confidence I had seen from the beginning. They assumed the facts would never extend beyond the paperwork they controlled. I continued responding the same way I always had, through formal filings, written correspondence, and complete transparency. I never challenged anyone in public, never accused anyone without evidence, and never discussed details that belonged inside the legal process. Investigator Laura Bennett contacted me the afternoon before the hearing and informed me that her preliminary examination had been completed. She did not reveal every finding because the investigation remained active, but she confirmed that all physical evidence, photographs, collected materials, and digital records had been preserved according to procedure. She also thanked Samuel Brooks for promptly providing the trail camera memory card instead of attempting to review or edit its contents himself. That single decision protected the integrity of whatever information it contained. As expected, Vanessa interpreted my silence as uncertainty. She continued speaking confidently at community meetings about future construction timelines and described my property as the final obstacle preventing long-awaited improvements from moving forward. More than once she repeated that once the court addressed the remaining legal issues, the neighborhood could finally begin its next chapter. Listening from the back of the room, I noticed something interesting. She no longer talked about whether I would sell. She spoke as though the outcome had already been decided. Confidence has a way of becoming carelessness when nobody pushes back. On the morning of the hearing, I arrived at the courthouse before sunrise, just as I had done countless times throughout my career. The marble floors reflected the soft light from the high windows, and the familiar scent of polished wood and fresh coffee filled the quiet hallways. I greeted courthouse staff with the same calm nod I always had, then entered through a private corridor unavailable to the public. Outside, Vanessa, Richard, and their attorney walked confidently through the main entrance carrying neatly organized binders, speaking comfortably with reporters waiting near the security checkpoint. They smiled for photographs, answered questions about responsible community leadership, and appeared completely certain that the day would end exactly as they expected. Inside the courtroom, residents from Silver Ridge Estates gradually filled the gallery, whispering among themselves as they waited for the proceedings to begin. Vanessa settled into her seat, straightened the stack of documents she had personally signed over the previous several weeks, and exchanged a satisfied glance with her attorney. She never once looked toward the doorway behind the bench because she believed she already knew exactly where I would be sitting. Then the courtroom deputy stepped forward, checked the clock on the wall, and announced in a clear, steady voice, "All rise." Every conversation stopped instantly. Chairs moved across the hardwood floor as everyone stood together. The side door slowly opened, and the expression Vanessa had worn with complete confidence since this conflict began disappeared before I had taken my second step into the courtroom. The moment I stepped through the doorway wearing my judicial robe, the confidence disappeared from Vanessa's face so completely that it seemed to drain the color from the entire room. The silver pen slipped from her hand exactly as I remembered, striking the polished floor before rolling beneath the counsel table. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The courtroom deputy completed the formal announcement, and I took my place with the same calm composure I had practiced throughout my career. Then I did the one thing Vanessa had never anticipated. I explained, on the record, that because I was personally connected to matters involving the property, I would not preside over any dispute concerning the substance of the case. Instead, I formally transferred every related proceeding to an independent judge from another jurisdiction, ensuring that every decision would be made without even the appearance of personal influence. The room remained silent as the transfer order became part of the official record. Vanessa looked toward her attorney, expecting an objection, but none came. The process was lawful, transparent, and impossible to challenge. Over the following weeks, the independent court reviewed the evidence exactly as it had been preserved. Every certified letter, every electronic message, every revised purchase proposal, every meeting minute, and every signature created a timeline that matched perfectly with the official investigation. The Homeowners Association's own records confirmed repeated efforts to acquire my property long before the emergency. Survey drawings showed that my lot occupied the exact location planned for the development's entrance boulevard. Work orders requesting cleanup had been prepared before investigators completed their examination. The trail camera provided by Samuel Brooks documented activity near the service road during the relevant time period. And because the evidence had been preserved correctly from the very beginning, its reliability remained intact throughout the proceedings. Investigator Laura Bennett presented her findings professionally and without speculation, carefully explaining the sequence of documented observations while leaving legal conclusions to the court. What ultimately changed everything was not a dramatic speech, or a surprising confession. It was the consistency of the records. Dates matched. Emails matched. Meeting minutes matched. Property plans matched. Every document that Vanessa had confidently signed while believing she was building pressure instead became another piece of a much larger picture. In the months that followed, the proposed development was suspended while additional reviews took place. The Homeowners Association underwent significant leadership changes, and new policies requiring greater transparency were adopted by the community. My property remained exactly where my father intended it to be. Rebuilding took time, but every new beam reminded me that foundations matter far more than appearances. When the new front porch was finally finished, I carried my father's old hammer, the one that had survived as a treasured keepsake, back above the fireplace where it had always belonged. Some evenings I still sat beneath the old white oak listening to the wind move through its branches, grateful not because everything had returned to the way it once was, but because truth had been given the chance to stand on its own. Looking back now, I realize Vanessa never truly lost because I wore a judge's robe. She lost because she believed influence mattered more than integrity, assumptions mattered more than evidence, and pressure mattered more than patience. My father used to tell me that if you measure carefully before making the first cut, the rest of the work becomes much easier. Years later, standing inside a home rebuilt on the same ground he once shaped with his own hands, I finally understood exactly what he meant.